guys, I hope you are doing really well. I want you to stay tuned today because I am going to teach you how to win arguments. It's going to be great. But first, we're going to start off with what I would not necessarily call a fun fact because it's not fun. It's actually really kind of sad. Did you know that almost an entire hour of every day we spend arguing with our families? In a 2018 research study, it shows that we average around 6 arguments a day with our family members. And that's an average of 42 arguments a week or 180 times a month that we argue with our family. And that's over 2,000 arguments a year. You guys, that is so much arguing. You know, we tend to get really heated about things that we care deeply about. Like, don't come at me with some Duke basketball stuff, you guys. You know I'm a Tar Heel fan, right? But you know, if we're honest, arguing about sports is kind of low on the scale of things that we really care about. You know, there are other things that really hit a nerve, and then we get deep into an argument. Like, you've seen people argue over things like sports, but then more intensely over things like politics or their beliefs or family stuff or friend drama. Like, you name it, people will argue about it. And I don't know about you, but does anyone else feel like our whole country is literally arguing about everything? You know, everywhere you look, there seem to be people arguing. And I think most of us probably feel like all arguments are bad. I mean, conflicts usually don't make you feel that great. Usually, you know, I just kind of want to avoid them. You know, just avoid when it comes to conflict. But I think that's common, right? I think a lot of us just want to avoid conflict. While we might actually feel strongly about things, we don't want to argue because we want people to like us. And a lot of times we're afraid that if we disagree or we express our thoughts, that it's going to turn into a big, nasty argument and they're not going to like us anymore. You know, we don't want to offend anybody or make somebody upset. But here's the thing. Not all arguments are bad. Arguing can actually be good if it's done in a healthy and respectful way. It is possible to work through conflict in a way that is productive and kind. Now, if you're like, not possible, it might be hard to believe that because sadly, we don't see a lot of good examples of people working through conflict in a kind, respectful way, which is why today I am going to teach you how to argue. Okay, so conflict is a part of life because relationships are part of life. But arguing in conflict can be tough because our strongest feelings get all riled up when we're arguing. We get really passionate about the things that we care about, and we tend to dig in and just want to hammer home our point, right? We tend to get the most heated about the things or the people that mean the most to us. Let's say you have some strong beliefs about a political issue that means a whole lot to you. That can easily push a button when somebody says something that's really different from how you feel. And as soon as that button inside of you is pressed, as soon as that nerve is hit, you can find yourself right in the middle of an argument. Or maybe there are other things that really hit a nerve for you. Like maybe you really want a great relationship with your sister, but you feel like she just doesn't understand you. And not only that she doesn't try. And so you sometimes don't even know how, but you end up in constant arguments with her. And it's actually because you want her to understand you. You actually really want that relationship to work. But not only is it not working, but you end up arguing with her all the time. Arguments are almost always a result of someone not feeling understood or heard. So, if we don't feel heard, what do we tend to do? Well, we tend to turn up the volume in order to make ourselves heard. And a lot of times that's when arguments happen. We want our opinions and our thoughts and preferences to matter to the people in our lives. And that's normal. That's human. Here's the hang up. The person you are arguing with, the person that you are trying to school with your facts and your knowledge and your points, they also want to be heard. They also really want to be understood and listened to. They want their opinions and ideas and preferences to matter to you. Usually, if you're in an argument, it's because there's a gap in understanding. The thing is, it's really hard to create new understanding, to really grasp someone else's point of view if you're yelling at them. So here's the deal. You are going to have conflict in life. That's inevitable. But like I said, today we are going to learn how to argue for the win. We are going to learn from James. Now, James was an interesting guy because he was Jesus's half-brother. James wrote a letter to a group of Christians in the early church, and he gives us some wisdom about how to handle arguments. This is recorded in the book called James. James chapter 1, verse 19. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." James's instructions are for everyone, but especially for Christians. This is how Jesus calls us to communicate with others, particularly when we disagree. When we are quick to listen, we listen first, and we try to understand what the other person is saying. Do your best to hold off from speaking until you've actually made an effort to listen, to hear what the other person is saying. I think that applying that first piece of wisdom, that piece of wisdom alone, just really trying to listen to understand, that could actually solve a lot of our disagreements. Because often the reason that our arguments get so heated and go on for so long is that we're so preoccupied with trying to prove a point that we aren't actually listening to each other. And so James reminds us, you want to listen, be quick to listen. And then he says we want to be slow to speak. So when we're slow to speak, we pause before we speak our minds. We stop and we think before we just let every thought come rushing out of our mouth, right? And for some of us, this is really difficult. We want to speak what's on our mind because we feel really strongly about it, right? Especially when we're arguing about something that we really care about. The thought of not saying what we think or saying what we feel makes us upset because we want to feel like we're free to express our thoughts and our opinions, particularly when they're important to us. But remember, slow to speak doesn't mean that you never say what you feel. It doesn't mean that you don't speak at all. It doesn't mean that you sit back and just let somebody say their thoughts and that you don't say anything. James isn't suggesting that you don't share your point of view. Instead, what he's asking us to do is pause before we speak, to stop before we talk, to think about what we're gonna say before we say it. And I don't know about you, but in my experience, most of the things I've said that I've regretted saying are things that I regret because I just let them fly before I put thought behind them. You know, I was angry, I was upset, and so I just said it. And the instant it came out of my mouth, I realized, whoop, shouldn't have said that, right? And so what James reminds us is we want to be slow to speak. Pause. Think about what you're going to say and how it's going to come across before you say it. Now, if James were writing this letter today, he would probably also include a couple of other things. We want to be slow to speak, but we also want to be slow to text, slow to post, slow to comment, slow to talk behind someone else's back. Whatever the response may be for you, pause and think about it before you actually do it. That can prevent you from causing harm that you don't mean to cause. All of this really adds up to the final thing that James tells us. He says, be slow to become angry. Now, this is a total shift in the way that many of us approach arguments, because lots of us are like, I'm arguing because I'm angry. James isn't asking us to never be angry. He's not saying that. And he's not asking us to ignore our feelings, but what he is asking us to do is to lead with another feeling, to choose another feeling, a stronger feeling. to let our arguments be led by love. Choosing to become slow to anger means that we are going to choose love when we have a temptation to let our anger just drive everything that we would say or do. You see, when we're choosing to let our anger be in control, that can fast forward us into hateful, mean choices real quick. But James says, slow down. Be slow to anger. That means you make a choice to love someone. You make a choice to care about that person. It means we focus on the person we're talking to more than the point that we're trying to make to them. It means we value the relationship with a person more than we value being right. In other words, when we argue, we need to remember we need to care more about the person you're arguing with than the point you're trying to make. So the next time that you find yourself in a position to argue, what would it look like for you to care more about the person that you're arguing with than the point you're trying to make? What would it look like for you to say, I'm going to navigate this conflict by really trying to understand this person and their point of view, their opinion, rather than trying to win an argument with them? You know, my goal is understanding. My goal isn't to lay the smack down on them with everything that I say. This is how you learn to argue really well. The way you actually win at arguing is to win in the hearts of the other person. To say, you know what, you matter to me more than being right matters. I want to understand you more than I want to prove that I'm right or that my thinking is better. I care about this human being more than I do being viewed as more correct in my thinking. So a couple of things that you can keep in mind. First, I recommend that you really commit James 1:19 to memory so that the next time that something strikes a nerve and you are ready to dive right into an argument, that you will remember, okay, I need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So when you memorize that scripture, James 1:19, that it's just planted right in here. I'm going to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Second, pro tip for winning an argument, ask yourself, what would the win look like here? James reminds us that a true win is when we can disagree respectfully and treat another person with dignity, even when we're in the process of a disagreement. It's not really a win if you win an argument but lose a relationship. That's not really a win. You know, we lose the relationship because we don't treat a person with dignity and we care more about being right than we do about that person. And so winning an argument means that we care more about that human being than we do proving our points. Let's be people who care more about the person that we're arguing with than the points that we're trying to make. That's how you really win an argument.